Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth, with hosts Doug King and Cody Deese.
Hello and welcome back. Great to have you here for our podcast today. I am Doug, and I am here with Cody. How in the heck are you today, buddy?
Man, I am I'm great. We ended the last podcast, and I told our people, and I want to remind them again today about our new website that we launched.
Oh, yeah.
So, presence.tv. If you have not checked it out, go check it out. And we have, hopefully you find it as a resource. I think that was kind of our intention, is that it's not just like a website with information, although we did work really hard to try to refine who we are as far as an organization and what we are about. And hopefully you'll find that really helpful. Because I remember when I first got introduced to Presence, I was like, what the hell are these people?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So one of the things that was really helpful is just kind of redefining who we are.
Sure.
And we were able to do that on the website. And then integral theology. Doug, you've got some really great content on there. I mean, even your, 7-part video series?
Yeah. That's where we get a lot of activity, because it's going through basically this model of spiral dynamics combined with the integral theory of those that are in that universe and the biblical narrative, kind of tying it all together in an overview kind of way.
Yeah, totally. And then obviously the podcast and everything you can find on there as well.
Which by the way, are now categorized. What I like about the website is the fact that you can look at a subject like eschatology or what we've been doing with salvation, and you can decide, choose and pick what it is that you would like to take a look at. They're organized, I think, in a much more useful way.
Can I take a moment and read our refined version of who we are?
Oh, yeah. Do it.
I was going to do it anyways, but that was
works out well.
So this is what we came up with. So if you go to the website, you can see this, but I thought it was just a little biased because I was a part of a contributor to it, but I just thought it says so much about who we are. Presence is a nonprofit organization contributing to the developmental evolution of individual and collective spiritual consciousness. Think of us as spiritual cartographers. We are curating developmental charts, hosting global conversations, and amplifying fresh insights from leading edge voices on the future of spirituality. At Presence, we are asking, what is the future of religion with regard to universal God identity? Our proposal is an integral spirituality based upon the foundation of an integral theology. This approach transcends the boundaries of religious God identity on one hand, but also includes a narrative that supports the evolutionary consciousness that led us to this place through history. It's moving beyond debates about one true religious form and discovering a new space of formlessness wherein universal human oneness is nothing less than God with us, in us, and through us. It's coming to see that the divine is all in all, not all in some. For all those who sense and see an evolutionary shift unfolding at an unprecedented rate, welcome to the global conversation for a new earth. Welcome to Presence.
Beautiful. Well done. Well said.
That's who we are.
And always good to continue to ask the question about who am I? And because, who I am today wasn't who I was 10 years ago and 30 years ago. And same with all this, what we're really trying to look at, Cody, and what you and I are talking about is growth in thought, growth in this process called life. And the reason that's important is because if we suffer from, quote, arrested development, then you're going to end up with a lot of ideas in your head. They're going to keep you awake at night. And that's why we get emails from people that are saying, oh, wow, this has really helped reframe for me some things that have been bothering me for some time. So, yeah, we're real into this, and we really appreciate the involvement of everybody that continues to get in touch with us, email us, and so forth. We appreciate your questions. We appreciate you being part of the conversation.
All right, Doug. So here's the dilemma. We have some things to say about faith.
Yeah.
But as we started getting into it, per our normal routine, we realized that that discussion was much larger than probably we need to fit under this umbrella of what is salvation. So you also had several thoughts about salvation that we need to revisit, and then others that we just never got to. And so we've got this content and we're just trying to figure out what this next couple of steps look like. So probably what we'll do, Doug, is we will, like whatever content we didn't get to, let's throw it out there today. And then this conversation of faith, which we need to have, the conversation of even justification by faith, which is certainly a part of this. We'll just talk about that next week.
Yeah.
And jump into that. And however long that takes. And we'll just get into it and totally probably just frame it a different way.
Yeah, that sounds good. And again, because all these things are cataloged, if you're in a study that has to do with justification by faith or a study about salvation or whatever it is, it'll all be organized accordingly. So yeah, that's the best way to do this. And we don't have any particular impending event that restricts us from being open-ended by how many of these things we do. What we're interested in is your feedback. So anything that you feel like we could do that would make something easier, we always want to know about that. And then also, is even the concept of looking at an 8-part series too much? Or are you more concerned about, well, just make sure you cover the subject as much as you possibly can? Any of that kind of feedback, hey, shoot us a line. Let us know what you think, because those are the dynamics that we have to deal with when we sit down to put these things together.
Awesome. All right. To the matter at hand. What is salvation? So this is part 8.
Part 8.
Doug, where do you want to start as we kind of land the plane on this conversation? There's obviously so much that has been said. It'd probably be helpful to just review a little bit of that and then get into kind of fleshing out some things that maybe we didn't get around to.
Absolutely. And I guess I would start with the basic question, salvation from what to what? If we're talking about being saved, what are we being saved from? And that's where we have in previous podcasts, and this is kind of a summary, a high level to me, to what the basics of this whole conversation revolve around. And that is that there's a concept called sin and death. And the word that's used related to sin and death is the word bondage. So when you talk about salvation, it's the movement from bondage to freedom. I have been saved from bondage. Well, bondage from what? Bondage from this thing called sin and death. Now, I've done podcasts at the very beginning of the podcast series that have to do with the entrance of sin into the world and the entrance of death. And those are biblical concepts. The idea of sin related to relationship with God, and the idea of death as a relationship with God. So when we're talking about salvation, we're talking about the movement from that bondage to sin and death into freedom from it. Those are two different thinking paradigms, Cody, and we talk about consciousness. That, again, is what we're seeing in the God story. God is growing up his children through this revelation that is appropriate at specific times in history. That's the whole reason you and I have been using spiral dynamics, right? It's because if we're going to talk about salvation, we've got to talk about, well, first of all, how did the problem begin with? Where is that? You go back to archaic Adam and the first levels of spiral dynamics. And then secondly, how does the problem get dealt with? And where do we end up? Where have we ended up? Because, Cody, you talked about things that have kept you up at night. I've gotten several emails from people with regard to salvation that have a great deal of fear that to this day this question of am I saved creates a torturous situation in your head when you think that there is some kind of place of burning fire and everlasting, it doesn't end, separation from God, and you're still living a life where you're trying to figure out, am I saved? Is there something yet I need to do? Am I doing the right stuff? Am I doing enough things? Oh my goodness, I read the scripture and it says you can't even gossip. You can't do this. And I'm thinking, I do all that. And then there's other people that get into once saved, always saved. But then if you go into that church and the guy ends up going out and robbing banks and gets put in jail, you say, well, he said he was once saved, always saved. Obviously, he wasn't. Then you still have said the same thing. It's like a card trick, how do we figure out what the actuality of it is when basically we're still saying that as long as you live this entire life and we go to your funeral, and we can look at it, we can say, yeah, he truly was once saved, always saved. Or we can say, yeah, he's going to be saved because he lived a good life. It's the same thing. And it creates this ridiculousness of what is it that I have to do as a human being to be accepted by that which is my creator, that which Jesus refers to as my father, my parent, that one that has begat me, who put their image in me, their breath in me. What do I have to do to be accepted by them? What is enough? How do I know it's enough? That, Cody, that to me is where salvation starts, right? I mean, it's that conversation about the essence of it. The death part of it is that we're in some way or another separate from this entity we must please in order to be accepted. And that is the first thing that I'm hopeful people will see, that as we've done in this series, is that we're saying that is absolutely not what the biblical narrative teaches, what Jesus taught or any of the apostles. That is what has been interpreted as what they have taught.
Right. That's good, Doug.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Hey, as long as I've got one person out there, even if it's you, Cody, I guess I'll keep going.
Well, you said so much in that I think if we're not careful, we lose the beauty of everything that you just said and everything that is the trajectory of the narrative. And the reason I think if people oppose this type of thinking is because it's what keeps religions in business, right? Because if you walk around, start telling everybody that there's inherent union with the divine and they're inherently good, that there's not a problem to be solved, which was always that was always a thing for me. It seemed to me that I was taught this idea that God created the heavens and the earth, and then roughly somewhere around Genesis 3, Adam and Eve, it actually wasn't even Adam, that whole through one man sin into the world, they were like, nah, it was the lady. And again, another great jab at patriarchy.
Yes.
So
yeah.
It all kind of started there. And then basically the people went through hell until somewhere around first century, second century. It was like God's like, well, crap, I tried a flood and that didn't work. And we tried the kings and that didn't work. I guess I'll send someone. Well, how about we just try this? And so he tries on incarnation.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to have to get down there myself.
And then some are like, well, he comes himself, right? Great. And he comes himself to save us from himself. And it's basically almost like Jesus was like a Hail Mary pass. of just like, man, this is the best shot we've got.
Now that's
And so
clever.
let's
Hail
send him
Mary.
down.
Hail Mary pass. Now that is very clever. I like
It's
that.
like, well, let's just send Jesus down and we'll try it and we'll see if it works. And some days, Doug, like I'm 37, I'm a pastor. Some days it just seems so crazy. Like it's like, how many of us have bought into this, and Jesus becomes this problem solver
Yes.
because we have this problem, and so the only way to solve it is that he dies on a cross to take our place.
Yeah.
Because we're just absolute garbage. And then, as I was reminded this week, the way that the rest of the story is told, as I was told, is, well, the good news is that we will die, and there will be a judgment, and we'll stand before God, but God won't see us because we're absolute trash, but God will see Jesus who took our place.
Right.
Because he's the problem solver.
And the best part is I will be able to say to all those people who slept in on Sunday morning, I told you so. The best part will be when they get theirs.
The thing is, it's funny you laugh at that, but so much of this, when you dig into it, is about keeping this institution going. And look, I am a pastor. I get it. I've been on the side of that where I understand what it means to have to keep an institution going. I mean, think about the things that we're seeing in this narrative. They don't flesh out well for a religious system that is all about doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I even think about our church. Like the day we kind of moved from. Do you remember, like they used to talk about the 10% tithe?
Sure.
And then I introduced them to a radical idea, generosity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it was interesting. Like, wait, we don't have to do this? So you're telling me, like, we don't have to give a certain percentage of money for the gods to be happy with us,
right,
or God to be happy with us?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you don't have to. That's not at all how it works. Like, that's how the doing works.
Yes.
That's how selfish source works. That's how religious institution works. That's what it means to get on the hamster wheel and keep doing all these things until you're exhausted. But no, that's not how it works. And what you find is so much freedom on the other side of that.
Yes. And I would just say, to do an insert here on your work as pastor, that you're not putting an end to faith community. This is something that people think, oh, okay, well, if there's universal salvation, I guess that means why do we even meet anymore? Why would you have a faith community? The work that you're doing is to help your faith community transcend previous institutional thinking and to transcend that doing meritocracy thinking and to begin to perceive things in a different way. And so, for example, if you say the 10% thing, that's moving from a law, thou shalt give 10%. You talk about generosity, you've moved into the heart. Mm-hmm. That now we're talking about the place where God actually does dwell. Not in a church building, a temple, or a synagogue, or a mosque. God actually dwells in the heart. And what you're doing is you're challenging your faith community to start thinking from the heart. What is it that I truly want with regard to a message being proclaimed here at this place that Cody pastors? What is it that I want as far as participating in a collective of people who are focused on the principle of acceptance, not on the principles of judgment? What is it I want? What do you want? What do you want as you listen to this podcast? And the adherents of the law-based churches, in essence, which we continue to talk about here, is that they will actually try to tell you that there's something wrong with you, something wrong with your faith, if you even imply that God could be that big or that acceptance could come that easily.
Yeah, you're flawed.
Yeah,
at your essence, and they just so happen to have the solution to your problem.
Yes.
And that's how businesses work.
Yes. Got to have a
And
problem.
It's a business, and we can solve your problem. Doug, the one thing we
Sure.
haven't gotten to yet, and I love how the time just goes away, but the one thing we haven't gotten to yet is the Great Commission.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably should talk about that before we kind
Sure.
of close this salvation
Yeah.
series down. So, okay, in the world that I was raised in, that was the thing. So basically, it was like go into all the world and make disciples. And a part of that for us, we considered that the Great Commission. So it was basically like our translation was go out into all the world and get people saved.
Yes.
So we took mission trips.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And I would get on planes. Like my first mission trip was to India.
Wow.
And I was 17, 18 years old, but we'd get on a plane and we'd go over to some random part of the world. And it's funny now I look back and I see how much of that resembles colonizing other nations.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a whole other conversation.
Yes,
that
it is.
I actually think it's bubbling up in
Sure.
a lot of places.
Sure.
Because people are really starting to, just from a business standpoint, they're starting to look at missions,
Sure.
which used to be an entire line item in churches.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And millions of dollars are spent on
Absolutely.
flights and plane tickets.
Oh, yeah.
And on the list goes, to go over to the other part of the world to honestly make themselves feel good. This is such a cynical view of this.
Well,
but this is a part of how I was raised. And
Yeah,
so the big thing for me was how many people have you converted today was essentially the thing. And so the success of whether or not you're a good Christian or a bad Christian, which are great categories.
one of many judgment bars that you were up against as a Christian.
Oh God!
Right. Again, this thing of am I good enough?
Yes, a good Christian or a bad Christian.
Mhm.
I digress. Now, that said, it was, well, how many did you convert? And I used to go, Doug, we should totally start this podcast over because I could go 40 minutes on this. But on Tuesdays, we used to have what they called soul winning and visitation. So we would go knock on people's doors and I
Yes.
would hand them tracts,
Right.
like gospel tracts
Yes.
that would say, do you know the way to heaven?
Yes.
And people would come to the door, Doug, and my first question would be, if you were to die tonight, I would say, hello, I'm Cody. I'm from such and such church. If you were to die tonight, do you know for certain you're going to heaven? And then the most epic thing would be that they would bow down right there on their front doorstep and recite this prayer that I had,
Mm-hmm.
that I got from my people. And then they would get saved. And that was it. So it's like, this is the Great Commission. This is what you do.
Yes.
And isn't this what like even now the machine operates off of this, and it's caused, you think about how much division it's caused.
Yes.
Of going into Middle Eastern worlds that don't hold the same narrative we do
Right.
and attempting to convert these people.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
do we do? What do you do with the Great Commission now, knowing, we've talked about this, of what salvation is now and how we view it now? What do you do with something like the Great Commission? And is it necessary for us now to continue to move in different parts of the world to tell people who they are?
Yeah. Yeah. And so three different things you just outlined there. First of all, because Jesus as a religion has suffered denominating, because when you make Jesus a religion, Christianity, it will be a form. And now we're going to get into arguments that lead to split after split after split. Even if you have been, I know people that have been to house churches, tried to narrow it down to just having a house church, they still get in an argument and split, even in a house church. So what happens is you have this split where you have people that are known as evangelicals because they want to evangelize the world based on that commission of Jesus. Jesus clearly said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every living creature. He that believeth and is baptized will be saved. He that believeth not will be condemned. Well, so you have a split now. You have evangelicals who are more closely tied to a blue meme way of saying things, but now we've got progressive, emergent, whatever term you want to use for those kinds of Christians that are considered to be liberal, by the evangelicals, and they belong to the world of postmodernism. And postmodern Christianity's got a real dilemma here, because in postmodern Christianity, you are the guy that wants that infamous bumper sticker that says coexist. You are the guy that wants to put the cross on the bumper sticker with the Star of David and all of the other symbols. So now your dilemma as a postmodernist is you want everybody brought to the table in interfaith dialogue on the one hand, but what do you do with the Great Commission? Because if you look at them and say, oh, by the way, you need to believe and be baptized or you're going to be condemned, that flies in the face of having interfaith dialogue with people that you have to actually look at and talk to as real people, real human beings. It's a lot harder to do that. Most people at the church that when I grew up, you would far rather give all the money you could possibly give to pay somebody to go to another country than to walk next door and actually talk to your own neighbor about salvation. Oh. So the Great Commission was something that in actuality, nobody in the congregation bought into. They wanted to pay money for someone else to be their hired guy to carry that commission out. And even then you went to another country where those poor people were.
Oh, good God. Yeah. Isn't it interesting how I'm just thinking about this. This is real time, by the way. If any of you've ever wondered how we operate podcasts, we used to do notes, and now probably the last 6, they probably can tell. They're like, yeah, we can tell. But there's like 0 scripts. We're just going at it.
They're probably going to say they're better this way.
I hope. But I was just like, I want some of these conversations we have, like, they just need to be recorded. Now, that said, I was just thinking about how it's always interesting that, at least in the world I grew up in, is we would go to thousands of miles away to a foreign country, and we're so eager, and we're just anybody. We're just like, do you know Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior?
Yes.
But we would never do that. We would never operate that way.
No, because you got to live here. You got to go to work. You got to live in the same neighborhood with those people. You can't do that here.
So the question is, what do you do with it? What's? I hear what you're saying about interfaith.
Sure. So what do you do with the commission itself?
What's an integral perspective of this? Now that we, as we are defining salvation as waking up to what is already true about you.
Yeah. So how many minutes have we got left here, Cody? What do you think, buddy? I just want to know before I try to wrap it up.
It's 27 minutes.
It's 27. Okay. So in 2 minutes, let me say this.
Please do.
I guess why I ask you. So everybody knows that we use the Venn diagram of form, transform, and formless. The Great Commission belongs in the world of transform. Mm-hmm. We can talk about this more, but the Great Commission is not in the realm of formlessness where I reside today. I believe that the Great Commission was for that point in that period in time because there were 2 things that were being modeled. Faith in Christ was going to lead to a parable identity of sheep, and those that clung to the law, that was a system of condemnation, 2 Corinthians 3. They were then going to remain condemned. Believe and be saved, or don't believe and be condemned. And that great judgment day was a day in the past. It was a day in which what was judged was all that stood in the way of the true self. What was judged were all the things that developed a false self, like a temple, a religion, a priesthood, sacrifices, works of the law, my personal obedience. All of that was judged to be what would be considered those who were the goats. Now, at the end of it all, though, Paul is going to be very clear in Romans by saying, yes, that rejection of those who were part of the ones who came under judgment is only a step in the process. And he says, if their rejection is based on that, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? Meaning that God will accept them, not on that basis, but everything they believe is going to be lost if they hold on to it. Just like today, everything I believe that's against spirit is going to end up being corruptible. It's not going to work. It's not going to last. That's really what the narrative is trying to say. Those things are things that don't last. They don't work because they resist Spirit. And that Great Commission was preached at that time until salvation came. And now where we are today, we do things like podcasts. I teach my children. I work with people anywhere that they're willing to have these kinds of discussions. Not so that they'll be saved, but so that they can become aware of the basis upon which they've already been saved.
And maybe the most essential work of all is the work of listening. So maybe when we get in our planes and we fly over with our mission agenda, maybe instead of evangelizing the world, maybe we should just sit and listen because the divine is speaking through everyone. Well, that's it. We got to go. People, what is salvation? Again, as with all these podcasts, this is not a period. This is a comma. You get to continue to explore this. Hopefully, this series has been some help for you. And next week, piggybacking off this conversation, we'll talk about faith. Have a good week.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.